Hello, everyone. Welcome to DEI, a podcast dedicated to discussing diversity, equity, and inclusion. My name is Kara Sie, and we're honored to have Miss Sabiha Basrai with us. Is that how you pronounce your name?
Yes, Sabiha
Perfect.
Basrai. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Ms. Basrai is the co-owner of Design Action Collective, a cooperative that serves social justice movements through art, graphic design, and web development. Ms. Sabiha Basrai is also the co-coordinator of Alliance of South Asians Taking Action, where she collaborates with racial justice organizations to organize international solidarity campaigns. She is also on the advisory board of the Center for Political Education, a political organization that supports left, progressive social movements, the working class, and people of color. She is a member of Race Forward's affiliate training team. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Ms. Basrai. It's a pleasure having you.
Thanks for having me.
Can you start off by introducing yourself briefly to us, your identity, and your work?
Sure. So I am the daughter of Muslim Gujarati immigrants. My parents came to this country in 1979 to pursue education and career. And I was born in 1982 and have grown up pretty much my whole life in California in the San Francisco Bay Area, occupied Ohlone territories. And I really kind of found my political understanding in the 1990s because I was connected to student organizing work around sweatshop labor and economic justice issues. So I was really learning as a teenager the relationship between the goods I purchase and the labor that goes into it, and the way that US corporations exploit labor, particularly the most vulnerable communities internationally that do not have labor laws and whatnot. So I was really learning about that and working on campaigns to hold US corporations accountable. And in 1999, when I was a senior in high school, the World Trade Organization protest, the WTO protest in Seattle happened. And so for those of you who were not around during that time, I recommend looking up that piece of history. It was a really important time for US-based activists, organizers, political folks to really unite internationally around the intersections of labor, race, gender, environmental issues, war, policing. That really taught me how all of these issues are intersecting. And so I had all of that in my head as I graduated from high school and went to college at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo to start studying graphic design there. And in my second year at Cal Poly, the attacks of September 11th attacks happened. And I was one of the only Muslim students on a mostly white campus, a very politically conservative campus, and had to very quickly find my political voice, not just because I cared about social justice, but because of my Muslim identity. And that was a really critical time for me as I was really figuring out so much about myself and my life and what I want to study and my career, but also suddenly being politicized in such a new way. So I really dedicated my time in college to studying graphic design, but doing anti-war organizing. And since then, I've been really grateful to have been able to build my career at that very intersection of graphic design and social justice work. And I've been a member of Design Action Collective for, about 20 years. And through my work with Design Action, through my volunteer work with the Alliance of South Asians Taking Action, I've been trying to continue to be in a constant process of learning, which also means unlearning things. It means unlearning the kind of model minority identity that I grew up with as a South Asian kid in Silicon Valley, and finding ways to really truly be in solidarity with all folks working in these movements. So yeah, that's a little bit about my origin story.
Wow, long experience. And as a Muslim woman and daughter of an immigrant family, can you tell us some challenges and oppressions you've faced or viewed that has happened in the United States as a minority?
Well, I'll definitely go back to those first few days, weeks, and months in the aftermath of 9/11, since that was such um, I was only 19 years old when that happened, and I was still learning about what US, foreign policy had been in the region. And um, I suddenly had to be really on the defensive, right? Like I I didn't have time to really think about the tragedy of the loss of life on September 11th, because a lot of the grief, the kind of national grief at that time, was weaponized against people like me and my family. So I had to really recalibrate like my own mind around what this moment meant. And very quickly we saw the US government create new laws to take away the civil rights of immigrants. And having studied what happened to Japanese families during World War II, I knew what the US government was capable of in times of war. So I was bracing myself for that. And we saw the creation of the NSEERS program, which was a program that the Department of Justice had created to require Muslim men from ages 18 to 35 from a handful of Muslim majority nations to register with the state. It was a completely racist law. And of the tens of thousands of men who were forced to register, many of them were put into deportation proceedings or were detained. The Alliance of South Asians Taking Action, that was active at the time, would go to the Department of Justice offices and just speak with the folks in line, give them know your rights materials, legal aid materials, would take down their names and contact information and then inform their families if they didn't come out. It was a horrific time, so scary. And of course, of that whole program, the NSEERS program, not a single terrorist lead was really found. The point of that program is to keep our communities divided and afraid. It was not at all about keeping us safer. And so when we saw that because of the racism against Muslim and Arab people in the wake of 9/11, because we saw our rights being taken away and generally kind of mainstream society being okay with that, that was also a very dangerous precedent to set, because if it's okay to do it to us, it's okay to do it to anybody. And so I was really thinking through lessons learned from other communities that had been impacted by similar state oppression, what I needed to learn in order to keep ourselves safe, and also how was I going to be showing up for the next, communities that got targeted. So that's really informed the way that I have uh, tried to participate in movements like uh, supporting undocumented folks and resisting the idea of the good immigrant versus the bad immigrant, really lifting up sanctuary for all as the call, and rejecting any ideas that kind of keep our communities in conflict with one another. Yeah.
Right. Wow. And with all this experience, realizing all the challenges that you faced, how has that influenced your view of what DEI is? And what, if you were to define what diversity, equity, inclusion means to you, what would it be?
That is such a great question. And I love that folks like you are really kind of interrogating what we mean when we say DEI. It has been used as a shorthand for a lot of things and can also be used in a way that like flattens the important nuance that is required of us to actually be transforming ourselves on the internal level, the interpersonal level, the like, institutional level and the structural levels. And so when we think about all those different levels, then we have the best chance of creating lasting change and being really and having integrity with each other as we do it. So I think an example for me is I can share, like I certainly have a lot of internalized oppression, just because I've often experienced subtle reminders that I either don't belong somewhere or that I'm not qualified for something. And so unlearning that own kind of the way that my own mind has been colonized by those white supremacist ideas, having to work to unlearn those is my own personal journey. And I think we're all on, different journeys around that. And I think when I start to zoom out though to more like who am I in this larger network of people and institutions and government agencies and laws and borders, I think a lot about my responsibilities. So in the case of my activism with the Alliance of South Asians Taking Action, one thing that I'm really grateful for are the other anti-imperialist organizations in the Bay Area who have taken up leadership to bring an international perspective to the issue of prisons and policing here in Oakland, where I live. So the idea of understanding that militaries from Israel and Philippines and India and the police departments of our cities in the United States are all sharing information, sharing technology, sharing training techniques, and are doing so in a way that is really about keeping our communities down. Um, and when I understand that, then we're invested very much in each other's liberation struggles. And that's not new. I mean, international solidarity is not new, but it is something that I was really grateful to learn from folks here in Oakland. And then when I think back on my own ancestry and the fact that my parents were able to immigrate to this country in the first place because of the civil rights movement and the way that changed immigration quotas for people from Asia, and then I go back even further and learn about the way that Black civil rights activists were opposing the British occupation of India, earlier in the 20th century. This idea of seeing each other's struggles connected is not new. And so for me, that political education has been really critical. And as I kind of have become more of a leader in racial justice work, anti-Islamophobia work, keeping that intersection front of mind helps me to not, silo the work where we think, oh, I'm just going to work on this one issue that affects my community. And maybe, sometimes when we do that, we can advance our goals at the expense of another community. And so being in constant dialogue and conversation around what our liberation actually looks like when it's tied to each other versus just this one very specific campaign. So
Right.
that's the learning that I feel like I'm really grateful for here in the Bay.
Hmm. Thank you for, because the definition, you definitely included a lot of history. And now, as DEI has become more of a political term, it's actually not in the first place. It has many other words and many other contexts in history. And so, as someone who worked and is working in racial equity in many political campaigns, how have you seen DEI help secure some rights and representation for minorities like you throughout history, throughout your lifetime, and also in the past few years? And can you envision a world without DEI policies?
Oh, that is such a great question. So one thing that I've learned from organizations like Race Forward is that the work is not linear, right? Like we can advocate and institute new policies and procedures within our institutions that then require changed behavior on everyone's part, even if not everyone's hearts and minds are aligned around it yet. And maybe the kind of hearts and minds alignment around inclusion and equity kind of comes later because it's just become part of the practice. So I really appreciate being reminded that it does not have to be linear. And I guess looking back at examples of how growing up in the 1980s, I remember a time where it was illegal, or it was a fireable offense to be queer and out at work, right? Like if someone outed you, like you likely lose your job. Um, and that, permeates all aspects of society then about whether we can talk about things, whether folks can be out or have to stay in the closet. Like uh, and as a cis het person, I was really oblivious to the level of suffering that was happening because of that dominant narrative and those policies and procedures. And so seeing the kind of activism that has shifted not only kind of cultural norms around inclusion when it comes to gender and gender expression and orientation and identities, the shift there has been really I've really appreciated being able to learn from, like, what did it take for the cultural shift to happen? What did it take for new laws to get enacted to make it actually you cannot fire somebody for this. You cannot expel them from a university. You cannot deny them housing. And I know that the people that had enforced those really oppressive rules are still around. Like it's not that long ago. So what our work does then is push those voices to the margins to make folks who are trying to maintain the old status quo that that required that level of inequality and oppression, to push them out to the margins in a way that makes them kind of irrelevant to our lives.
Right.
And and so I look for examples like that keeps me motivated. So I remember, yeah, there were folks in my own community, Muslim folks, immigrant folks, and endured a lot of racism and abuse in their day to day, in their workplace, in their schools. The kind of harassment that just is now we're able to say, like, actually that's not okay at all. And the struggles continue, and clearly there's massive debates around um, rights to protest and freedom of speech on college campuses when it comes to our identities and how they're politicized in this particular moment. But I think that our practice of being able to advocate for ourselves and rely on the legacy of work that of folks that come before us is really inspiring. And when I'm feeling a little bit pessimistic about my capacity for change or a specific institution's capacity for change, I think about folks who work so hard to win the rights that I enjoy and sometimes take for granted, and who never saw the fruits of that labor. But they did that work, and I get to benefit from it now. So whether it's having as a brown woman, as a woman at all, to be able to live and have independence, have control over my finances, to be able to vote, as an American citizen, like all of the different kind of privileges that I enjoy were hard won by other folks. And that means that when we think about DEI, it's not just about making sure we have more diversity of race in a particular workplace. It's about whether we have shared power, agency, and are actually moving ourselves forward, knowing that folks of your generation are going to be coming up ahead behind us too, and pushing even further forward in ways that maybe I can't even imagine right now.
Right. And as you mentioned recently, with the intense political battle between the left and the conservatives, DEI has become more of a political term. And so I don't know if you have observed it in your work, but have you seen how um, oppressing the term DEI or deeming it as lessening diversity and abolishing this policy or this concept has actually led to more oppression and inequity in our nation?
Yeah, that what you're describing is the kind of culture war between the MAGA right trying to characterize anything that supports multiculturalism, freedom, to kind of characterize that as somehow un-American, or somehow trying to uh, yeah, I guess that somehow the MAGA definition of being American is a particular thing, and those of us that are trying to push for more rights, more inclusion, more multiculturalism, and freedom of expression are seen as un-American, or a threat to the kind of way America should be, and it's easier to kind of call us names than to actually engage, of course, with the content of what we're talking about. And using narratives like, okay, anti-woke laws, or, the hysteria around critical race theory, calling it some, but really what is
Mhm.
critical race theory is
Right.
it's the history that I studied in school about Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement. Like those are the kinds of things that the right is attacking and trying to ban outright. And the effects I see of that are we're going to have more and more people of your generation graduating without knowing that the Japanese were interned in this country, without knowing the brutality of slavery in this country, the legacy of Jim Crow laws, or the way that redlining continues to the scars in our city from redlining are still impacting who gets to go to what school and what bus lines exist and whether there's a grocery store in your neighborhood. So what does it serve to ban and oppress this kind of education and information access? It serves white supremacy, uh,
Right.
and it serves maintaining uh, an inequality, an economic inequality as well. So that's a very dangerous thing. We're approaching a new election. There's a lot of our rights are on the ballot, and we may be reverting back to some of the times where we thought, oh, our ancestors fought for these rights, and we have these rights, but actually those rights could be taken away again.
Yeah.
Uh, and so these conversations around what's at stake, actually, it's not just an intellectual discussion and debate about the definition of inclusion and equality. This actually is about our lives and whether we have access to, have our needs met and can thrive and be safe. And that's what's that's what's at stake. And the trainings around diversity, equity, inclusion are tools to resource ourselves to continue to advocate for our rights and shape our institutions so that any negative forces that have other agendas, or repressive agendas just don't have the power to implement them.
Hmm. I love what you just said because right now, growing up in my generation, we might have less and less of those discussions that might shape our future. And right now, it's also an exciting moment in history with Kamala Harris running for president. Do you have anything to say about this moment, what it means for women, inclusivity, and people of color?
Yes, that is certainly an exciting moment, and I can see why that would be inspiring for a lot of folks. Um, yeah, I think Harris's story is a really interesting one as a biracial woman. There's a lot there's a lot to be excited about when it comes to the possibilities of moving social justice work forward under a Harris administration. There's potentially, a lot of things that our organizing work can do. But fundamentally, she is part of a system. She's part of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party has not historically been a advocate for including all of our rights.
Right.
And we can't forget that for the last several years, the Biden administration has been relentlessly funding the genocide in Gaza. So it's a complicated question that you're asking me,
Mhm.
and I think that it is understandable to hold multiple feelings at the same time. And right now, my biggest motivation is to think about to center the folks who are most impacted by these issues of war, of racial inequality, of environmental racism, and really consider like what is going to support their safety and their abilities to thrive. And so for me, that actually means looking hyper locally. And so for anybody who is able to vote in the 2024, this November 2024 election, please don't forget the down ballot things like read the propositions, who's being elected to your school board, who's on your city council. Those are the people that will have a really immediate impact on your life and the quality of life of the folks that are most vulnerable in your communities.
Right. Um, and as I know, you're also a co-founder of your design cooperative. So, um, how has art or design or web or development influenced your storytelling, and how have you used those mediums to um, encourage political campaigns or actions?
So Design Action Collective was founded in the early 2000s. So this was right around that same time I was describing in the years after 9/11. This was the George W. Bush administration. You know, the NSEERS program had been enacted, the Patriot Act had been enacted, and the anti-war movement was growing. So the bombing of Afghanistan, the shock and awe devastation in Iraq it was all underway. And there were new humanitarian crises emerging as a result. And the US was really positioning itself as this kind of unilateral world power to go and do preemptive strikes and bomb really whoever they wanted. And of course, US corporate interests were also at play when we think about the fossil fuel industry. So this was the time that Design Action was founded. And the needs at that time were really about reacting, to these like onslaught of horrible things and finding creative ways to advocate and share messages and build power to actually resist. And so the forms that took for us were a lot of posters, a lot of like brochures and books and reports, things that kind of documented what was happening and explained the impacts so that we could actually um, try and move decision makers on them. Um, Doing direct action protests. So that was a lot of what the early days of Design Action was. And, this was again the early 2000s, so there was no social media. Not everybody was on websites, it was a different technological time. No smartphones, none of that. So, it's interesting to think back on that and compare to now, where over the last 20 years, Design Action Collective as a cooperative did expand, right? The changing needs of the movement, changing technologies required that we expand our services and build up our own capacity, and also be thinking about how we were organizing our shop and onboarding folks who were also part of those campaigns, who were impacted by these issues, who have been systemically barred from our industry because of systems of oppression. So how we could kind of really make that a pathway to build up our team. And now we provide both, small and large, robust websites, kind of logo branding kind of services, and social media toolkits and style guides for organizations to maintain a kind of clear message and consistent visual language so that trust can be built over time. And, even things like infographics and data visualizations and videos, and really understanding the way information is shared on platforms like TikTok or Instagram. And when I think about all of that, the kind of spectrum of work that we do now, I'm realizing that a lot of it is more proactive. It's more about envisioning the world we want to see. It's about focusing on the things that we're advocating for versus just focusing on reacting to the things that we are against. And that's a really exciting place to be. I think both are important. And but I can see that shift over time, and that's a reflection of our the diversity of our movements and the strategy of our different movements, both locally and internationally, to be able to articulate not just the protest but also the vision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And with all those experiences that you've had founding this organization, leading so many campaigns, do you have any suggestions to our Gen Z population on what we can do to become more involved in those activism expressions, especially during this campaigning season and throughout our lives?
Oh, that is a lovely question, and I wish I had had so many more people to kind of workshop that question with me when I was in high school. But I know that the best advice I've gotten over my career and kind of lifetime as an activist is that I must pause and not make assumptions. So there's times when I can get really activated and really upset about something. And before I take action, I should ask more questions. And the questions can help lead us to, well, who's already working on this issue? What are the different organizations or people that are already doing something? What do they need? Um, which organizations are actually led by the people that are most impacted by that versus someone who's just kind of doing it for charity, but maybe isn't really connected in a meaningful, authentic way to the folks that are impacted. So, asking those questions, thinking about where do I want to invest my time and how can I do that in a way that is accountable um, to this issue. And that allows us to do some reflection on our own privileges, our own, positionality when it comes to power, and think about our responsibilities. And yeah, stay curious and ask questions and not assume that we have the answer, not assume that we should be the one to lead the thing or do the project. It might be that you realize, actually, this other person I know is really interested in this, or like has family who's been affected by this, or maybe was an immigrant or a refugee. Like, let me see if I can connect them to that opportunity, and I'll, continue to look for another opportunity for myself as well, or points of collaboration. So we think about this as collective efforts versus our own individual journey and our own individual goal to, be something or do something. It really helps us also do it for the long term, because if we just get really reactionary and activated and kind of throw all of our energy into things in different directions, we burn out and we're not very effective. So my wish for all of you is to uh, build relationships, build trust, commit to lifelong learning. Know that there's things that you understand right now that you might actually have to shift in the future as you learn more, and be generous with yourself and each other as you're in that learning. And then, yeah, really see how you can invest your time and support folks who are already working on things that you care about. And maybe, sometime in the future, you might find a leadership role for yourself or find a need in which you could start a new initiative, and that would be wonderful. But if and when that happens, you can trust that your decisions are rooted in a really clear understanding of your conditions and what's needed.
Great. Thank you so much for the advice. And thank you so much for being here today. It was a pleasure having you, and I loved our discussions.
It was my pleasure, and wishing you all the best. And yeah, there's so much good work ahead. And thank you for your commitment to justice.
And that concludes today's episode on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Before we sign off, thank you for listening to Don't Erase My Identity. Stay tuned for next week's episode.